as we go into this last session, which is open space, which means everybody can convene a space to discuss. Think about that piece as well, because it could be you want to make a film. It could be you want to start a podcast on climate, on community climate issues. I don't know, whatever. You see what I mean? Think about what's most compelling to you in your own activation, in your own moving forward in this climate future.
Okay. So from that, building on to the method that we'll be using for this session will be open space technology, which is harnessing the creative chaos. So this is very simple, at least for me, simple principle that so the principle of open space is, wait, let me backtrack a bit. So how you do it, it's like opening a shop. So you have something that you're really concerned, something you really want to go for. There's a topic that you really want to discuss. So you open a shop. So that is why in the center there's a A4 paper, a marker, and a masking tape. Don't worry about the masking tape. So if you have any topics that you want to convene, you want to host, you'll take a piece of paper and then say, this is what I want to talk about. And then for us in FSI, me, Nat, Vika, and Jerome will prepare the space for you to talk about those things. So automatically, those who have the topic will be a host to a topic, and the rest will be the participant. So participate. If you're really drawn into that topic, of course you will go to that shop. If you want to buy an earring, you go to an earring shop, not to a ring shop. Yeah, so the principle is whoever comes are the right person. Whoever comes to your topic are the right person for the space. And whenever it starts, and when it ends, it ends. Doesn't matter if you will talk for a long time if you need to, but when the time's up, it's up. But if the time is not yet up and there's nothing more to discuss, means it ends. And then the last one is whatever happens in that space is the only thing that can happen, nothing else. And then the roles, of course, there's the host and the participant, but there's also the butterfly who maybe is too heavy for the topic, so you take your time out and then hover around, reflect outside. And then there's the bumblebee who goes to one shop to another shop, one space to another space, so it's free. And the only rule is you have 2 feet, you follow where your feet go.
To memberi pengalaman secara life experience. Yeah, so that's the two goal. And the problem that we want to solve with that goal is that there's the lack of relationality of connection on the impact of climate change, especially among those laymen who doesn't understand data, scientific data. So that's the problem that we identified, and the goal was those two lah. So when we brainstorm activities that might be able to combat that issue, number one, which was my popcorn idea, like what would it look like to have call-in slide in a festival? So number two is yeah. And then number two, escape room. So imagine, yeah. Yeah. Like it's super relatable. Everybody can join the escape room. And then the escape room would be based on seasons of natural disaster, impact of climate change. And then if we have extra funding, we can use special lenses, AR lenses in these escape rooms. And then, so in the realms of gamification, collabs with artists or collabs with game makers to make board games or Legos based on climate change data. And then the next is maybe pop-ups of virtual reality in existing festivals. For example, the Riverson market. Yeah. Jam goes climate. Yeah, exactly. So there's this sudden virtual reality pop-up as a start. Yeah, ketemu. And then in the realms of environmental education, maybe coming up with like syllabus or simple, I don't know, like, something like that, or materials that a 5-year-old can understand, data, the climate change data. And then, but we actually didn't went deeper into that. And then we went on about collaboration with art galleries, private ones, or the state ones, or make our own art galleries. And it can also be a traveling curated art installation across Sabah. Again, translating data into something that's experiential. And then the next is the holograms. So Chipa shared that he actually experienced hologram of environments when he went to Korea, kan? Yeah. So it's actually achievable now. It's not like apa yang sci-fi movie, like people actually do that now, holograms. So imagine holograms of SSP, but in the Sabah context, you know. Yeah. And then number 8, a pop-up storybook, but in native languages. So the storybook would cater, for example, for those aged 7 until 12. And then, when you open the pages, it's 3D. Ada kan yang begitu? Yeah. Can also. Depends on the funding. And then number 9, theater. So imagine collaborating with existing theater clubs in high schools or theater clubs in independent kumpulan seni di Sabah, and then to come up, how do we translate data into script writing? And then these scripts will be made available for free in website, so they can download and then reenact the script. And then the script, they can actually do it in their schools or in their theater. So the target is more on that kind of academics or high school groups, theater clubs that want the script. So translating that data into script writing, and then people actually follow that script. Or maybe they can adjust. And then we also have this idea, like how Forever Sabah, we host student groups, and then these student groups will have experiential practical activity of the project. So we would take the script that we did and then have the student group to reenact or do a theater on that script. And then at the end and then we will tell them that this script is based on real life scenario of this kampung. So immediately they're like, oh, okay, connect. And then the last one, number 10, Teda. Oh, okay. So, and then I asked a question, like, if between all of those points,
which point that is most practical to bring to the kampung yang paling terpencil di Sabah, like the most remote places in Sabah, which activity we can bring, and then number 8 seems to be most practical, which is the pop-up storybook in native language so far lah. And then the other question also I asked, if you guys really really want to do something now, which point? And then we all said the escape room. So this is another so we plan an escape room punya concept. So it will be based on, so there will be 4 rooms. It will be based on, of course, real data. It's a group activity, and then the platform that we will bring the escape room to, maybe existing carnival or existing events that is already happening. We just look for slots to bring the escape room. For example, the jam, Ketamu, or maybe, you know, like how they are traveling fun fair di daerah-daerah tu kan, tamu-tamu besar. So we sewa for slots lah and bring this escape room begitu. Yeah. So again, data being translated into something relatable. So that's in terms of platform, and then money. So to start, we first collab with maybe Tourism Sabah or like. Yeah. So we look for funds, yeah. And then maybe look for arts grants, kan? Art grants, yeah. And then in the same time, we gotta have a business team in the escape room also to make profit so that it's sustainable. So that, yeah. So so maybe eventually, if it gets bigger, maybe a social enterprise. So that's in terms of the money. And then in terms of open access data and about us. So of course, a website that has free resources, materials, and also past events, upcoming events for the escape room and so on.
So, in hearing all of the stories today, but also kind of just like looking at where all the value immersions took place, I always think that this is often just like a very, thank you, a very special space, because I think that as, you know, Sabahans or people visiting Sabah, macam, we realize that that's actually a disconnect between Tanah and Air, disconnect between also macam, you know, as Malaysians, like, was Malaysia formed on the 31st August 1957, or was Malaysia formed on 16 September? There is, I think I interpret, I have more questions as well, actually, or I have, this is more of a philosophical thing, but I realized in speaking about this subject, at first I was trying to think about, like, what are some non-negotiable facts or stories or ideas that people in Sabah need to agree on before we come to a place where we can collectively come up with solutions on climate change. Because if there are people who are denying, you know, the facts and the figures, who are denying all the hard work that you guys are doing here to collect all of that information, then we are in trouble. But Cynthia, who participated as well, also brought up how there was that some of the climate research as well done by federal was conflated with what was happening in Sabah. Or in Sabah, for example, you have people who are kind of just appropriating or misappropriating that data, which is really kind of dangerous. So what I kind of learned from discussions with everybody is that we kind of have an existential crisis in Sabah, because we were never able to kind of have our own media and our own narrative, which is a good and a bad thing, because we get to figure out who we are, but it's become chaotic in the sense that we can't tell the difference between
So Natasha wrote here, connecting with ancestry. And then I added here, what is the impact in North Borneo, in Sabah? It's like Sabahans also don't know the difference between what is actually our culture and what is actually in, like, kena macam ubah by colonialism. So the difference between lived culture and performative culture, the difference between, you know, what are the stories behind our traditional costumes, but then, and then how did it become the unduk nadaw that it is today, which is tends to be very patriarchal. We don't have that awareness because we don't have we don't have that, we don't know those stories about ourselves. So it's also, so some of the things in education that can also potentially help is learning about the ME63 and Batu Sumpah Keningau, because intentions and niat are something that seems to bring a lot of people together. A lot of people seem to be able to agree on things like macam freedom of religion, and that, you know, our adat should be preserved, and that the land in Sabah should belong to Sabah. And we're seeing a lot of those things kind of disappear. So at the beginning, I was kind of thinking about like what if we can reclaim propaganda? So like it's about reclaiming propaganda through art, but somewhere along the lines, it feels like there needs to be a narrative. Maybe there needs to be some stories that are decided upon that, like, we need to all be able to agree on. Maybe we need to be able to all agree on the facts. But then after that, we all need to be kind of telling stories from a similar center so that we are able to decolonize our narrative from Peninsula, from federal government. And that also begins with asking who tells Sabah stories, who gets to, and having a sense of our trauma so that we're not, you know, acting upon neighbor or colonial envy and heading towards inappropriate development and using other people's solutions to fix our problems. What Wade brought up as well is like he noticed that one thing that Sabah has that he's not really seen in a lot of places is the Sabah pride in terms of the flag is everywhere. We have the flags everywhere. We have them on our shirts. Mount Kinabalu as well as a state symbol, and then
Karaoke.
yeah,
Karaoke is resistance.
yeah.
State symbolism with Mount Kinabalu, karaoke as a form of resistance. And because most of the media that we used to have, like back in history as well,
Sabah was actually making our own documentaries in the 70s, but then later on, in order to kind of just like create a national identity, they imported that identity from Semenanjung, but also they banned a lot of the native languages from, or restricted the native languages from radio. And karaoke, actually, people don't realize, it's because you're able to self-publish karaoke. It's because it's also the filmmakers from the 2000s, like Ampal, who are making straight to DVD movies and selling them at the Tamu. That self-publication is actually a form of resistance. And if we were able to frame the urgency in telling our own stories, I think people, I don't know, would be able to tell stories that have more deep local impact. Yeah, instead of using film to tiru Hollywood ka, tiru Semenanjung, yeah, we need to know who we are and how, and that's the only way that we can move forward.
And to add, and through art, through film, it's a way that we can practice and have some preservation with our own native language, our traditions as well, especially those in the younger generation and those currently now trying to learn about ourselves. And yeah, this is the whole cycle of it. And how we can, a part of the cycle, and how we're going to use, how we can use art, film, maybe even exhibitions through telling our narratives in Sabah and our own traditions, our culture.
Because Cambodians have a name for it, which is, I mean, Cambodians experienced the genocide like during the Khmer Rouge, and they actively know that they have to reclaim their culture and the history of their films and narratives out of that urgency. So maybe we need a name for what happened to Sabah, and how our narrative was basically kind of pushed down to make way for other peninsulas.
So we had the gathering of the stuff and the sharing of the stuff, but we saw them being super connected, necessary to connect them. I'll start over here, this idea of a website which would have strong interface with various sort of social media ideas. In this discussion here, we said, yes, the website should have scientific data that's understandable and so on and so forth and show the current realities. But the accent of the discussion on the website was that we needed social media approaches if we were to really engage people. So that meant everything from the idea of, developing influencer advocates, if you like, using voices from the ground to tell stories rather than processed data, even developing kind of FSTV kind of segments and stories, as well as other kinds of social media, TikTok, live sessions and so forth. Making it, hip, talking about the attention span of young people and so on. So a website that has a very strong oh, jeez. If someone could just stand and hold it while I talk, that would probably be easier than taping it. All right, so that's that segment. But we wanted it to be a space that people would, download stuff from, but they would also be uploading their own stuff. So it's a kind of citizen science model of, you watch somebody talking in a very eloquent way about what's happening to rice because of the harvest season or whatever, and then you upload your own story or you talk to your own community and do something. So that relates to a kind of more of a kind of citizen science media generation component where people can use data stuff like Cobble Collect that we've been using. I don't know if everybody's seen that, but other methods, and maybe have some kind of support, encouragement, and so on. And they're feeding into it and they're feeding out of it. At the same time as we felt that there was a big slice of Sabahan society that wasn't going to go onto a website and watch really cool videos about this, but desperately needed to be engaged in the process. Some of those are people who are living, beyond the world of high-speed data, remote area communities, and so on, that we needed to have physical outreach to, and elders and others who are just, not in the cell phone world. But others are the powerful. The powerful are not hearing this message, or if they are, they're only thinking about it from, compliance point of view or rhetorical point of view. How can we really get deep in with those groups? And it was felt the only way of doing that was a systematic personal outreach, human engagement. Yeah. And we had a terrifying discussion about how difficult it is to change the social contract, as somebody put it. We had this wonderful paper that Shireen told us about. Where is she? There she is. She told us about a number of terrifying papers, but one of them was that CEOs who have daughters are much more likely to have decent climate change policies than CEOs who don't have daughters. So we didn't work out exactly how to weaponize that, but we could see it was. Yeah, we only had 40 minutes. But we were thinking about, how do we have that kind of engagement that can encourage people with power and influence who are taking decisions that they frankly know are wrong decisions in self-interest? How can we change that social contract? How can we get to them? So that was a sort of second area, kind of in-person systematic outreach. And then a third area, which we didn't have a chance to explore, but was a brilliant idea that came up at the end, is what is in the Sabah school curriculum about climate change? There is probably, I'm guessing there's something, I don't know whether anybody knows this, but how could we make that real? How could we really make that something that people feel and understand rather than some random diagram of greenhouse gases and some vague statement about other people doing something bad. Can we make that tell Sabah's story in the school curriculum rather than just some kind of random global science story that seems to be somewhere else and only going to appear in exams, not in your daily life? And then last but definitely not least is some kind of systematic outreach. And we talked about, well, can we get together kind of a broad coalition of organizations and partners, including government agencies like SFD or NGOs of different kinds, or UCSF or researchers who, for one reason or another, are working with a particular community or particular sector, and they say, hey, we'll do a 1 or 2 day exercise like the one we just did now, of listening to and gathering those local stories and sharing them. Similarly, reaching out systematically by sectors, everything from oil palm to agriculture to livestock to commercial fisheries, all is just making sure we're touching all of those bases. And then special groups. Let's talk to the military. What's their experience of climate change? Let's talk to Bobo Hizans. Let's talk to CEOs with daughters. Let's find...
Military probably already practiced 10 minutes outside, 50 minutes inside.
Yeah, they probably already have had that as a training. And the head office has already made sure they have air conditioning. But let's talk to all of these groups. And then the important thing is that all of these groups, we see a two-way arrow. The people who've been engaged like this, their stories can be here because they've been engaged. They want to go here. They get stuff. We're building a network of engagement. And then we have this big challenge here of translation. How on earth do we translate the different kinds of experiences people are having meaningfully to each other across, different value, quite apart from different languages, and but also value systems and so on. And as one of the people in our group pointed out, people engage with things where they feel there's a benefit. So how do we translate across different benefits, from people who are thinking about the happiness of their grandchildren to people who are thinking about short-term profit, to people who are thinking about maintaining, or gaining political power, to people who are thinking about, animals in the forest and so on. How do we translate all of these different reasons why people should care or could benefit from doing that? So,
and one thing, well, we talked about many things, but I'll just summarize it. One thing that we've never make intentional is talking about climate adaptation in project design. Because when I think about it, a lot of community-based projects is relevant to climate adaptations. Yeah. So that's just number one lah. So developing strategies well suited lah to help people affected by climate change to adapt. And then it may be relevant to other groups punya discussion juga. Number two is facilitating that processes to identify the problems that people will be facing with climate change and develop the strategy lah. And also including, I just want to put it out there lah, I think cultural revitalization efforts is also relevant lah, apart from adaptation, so that they can be more resilient. And then point number three is shift this maladaptation narrative by gathering bottom-up climate punya narrative. Because see, Colin pointed out about maladaptation just now, which is if your school is getting hotter, then just install a lot more air cons, which actually doesn't help and worsen the situation. And we should be talking about redesigning how buildings should be built and using sustainable materials, etc., etc. And then number four, talking about long-term adaptation plan, like macam forestry department is doing a climate vulnerability assessment right now. Maybe Belinda can talk more about that. But as people were talking, I just just capture everything as much as I can. And also, collaborative partnership is becoming more and more relevant now, and we need to become better at collaborative partnerships for adaptation measures, and including capacity building, training and trainers, and peer learning exchanges that's related to climate adaptation.
So we have a few points, and I think first and foremost, we want to approach this process by decolonizing. We want to approach the indigenous community. We don't want to just approach them and say, hey, you have to do this. This is what you have to do. No, we don't want to do that. So what we should do is we sit with them and ask them, what do you think is the solution? Instead of us telling them what to do, right? And then we did touch up upon stop looking towards the west, and because most of the time the answer is already here. Yeah. And then this is also basically about harnessing the indigenous community's knowledge in policy making. It's kind of related to Nev's topic as well. Yeah, so it's a bottom-up climate narrative. And then we did talk about capacity building for the indigenous community as well, because if we want them to start writing the policy themselves, what we can do is just help with capacity building lah. For example, climate literacy, policy literacy, and documentation. They should document their experience a bit more properly, if that makes sense. And whether we like it or not, to get this process going, we need to build a relationship with the higher ups as well, because they're going to be the one who will accept or not accept what we want to propose. So that's one point. And in doing this, we want to protect and recognize the rights of the indigenous community. For example, like I mentioned in our previous presentation, the indigenous community in Kampung Pitas Laut cannot gather their resources from the surrounding mangrove area anymore. So we don't want that to happen. We want them to have their rights through their practice. And we also touch upon the idea of the indigenous group as a whole writing a memorandum. So if their voice is loud enough, if they talk as a group, the government or anybody else cannot just push it aside because it's too loud to ignore. And it's also effective if we have a representative of the indigenous community in the political scene or the policymakers higher up. Yeah, I think that's probably all. Yeah, it's quite, it's just the basis of how to begin involving them in policy making.